Okay, I'll go ahead and call us to order and declare that we have a quorum of 7 members present, with Mrs. Nolan joining by telephone. And that takes us to item C1, consideration, discussion, possible action related to the 2019-20 budget and compensation plan. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. Before we get started, I'd just like to ask Mrs. Nolan, were you able to hear Mr. Harris okay?
I was. He's a little harder to hear than you.
Okay, well, I'm about a foot away from you, and he's a little bit across the room, so we'll try to project our voices a little bit to make sure you can hear. If you can at any time, please just let us know. Raise your hand. Just let us know.
I will. Got it.
Mr. Harris, moving on to item C1, this is a significant change in what we're going to be showing you today, and that's because House Bill 3 was passed by the 86th Texas Legislature and was signed into law by the governor within the last week. That has fundamentally changed a lot of our budgeting assumptions, and we have been spending the greater part of 2.5 weeks determining precisely how much money we are going to have available, how much must be used towards compensation, and how many other items we were able to address for the 2019-2020 budget. So as we go through the presentation, we'll talk about where we are this current year, which is under current or previous law now, where we were in May, in the progress that we had made up to that time, and then the difference. You'll see a very big difference as to where we are now, and that's a very good thing. So with that, to continue our discussion regarding the 2019-2020 budget is Mike Martindale, Deputy Superintendent and CFO. Mr. Martindale.
All right, Dr. Ely, board members, let's start with where we are tracking under current year. So we begin these for 18-19. The last time we looked at this, we had not completed, obviously, the school year in May. So this is reflective of end of school year for 18-19. We finished this past school year, average daily attendance was down minus 0.19%. Through the fifth 6 weeks, it was 0.18. And actually, when we adopted our budget going into this year and trying to project the influence or the impact of charter school, we adopted a minus 1%. So actually, we finished ahead of where we projected initially at the beginning of the year, but very little movement, really relatively none from the end of the fifth 6 weeks to the end of the school year. So this is where we're finishing for this past school year, 0.19 negative. I mentioned, I know I did last month, possibly April, that the timing of SHARS payments and settle-ups had been adjusted, so we were getting 2 settle-up payments in 1 year. You'll see that reflected in budget amendments in your financials at the regular board meeting, but it did an add of $1.5 million there for the additional settle-up payment for SHARS this year. We had that budgeted for $2 million, so we added $1.5 million to that, so it's an increase of $1.5 million to $3.5 million since last month. We had an increase of $6,000 on the foundation. That just has to do with some of the movement between the fifth 6 weeks and sixth 6 weeks. It's irrelevant.
Sorry, he's making sure all of them are on. Just drive on ahead.
And now that I have your attention, no, I'm kidding. Now we'll look on the appropriations side. We had approved around $134,000 worth of exceptional items up in when we looked at this information in May. We have approved an additional $292,000 to put that total at just shy of $430,000. Those are, again, items that campuses and departments requested for 19-20 school year. However, we're capturing those because of how we're tracking in current year budget. Some of those, or not some of them, all those that we've approved up at this point in time. Acoustical panels, those are in the cafeteria at Pebble Creek Elementary School. Level classroom libraries for our English classrooms at Cypress Grove. Some furniture replacement at AMCMS as well as College Station Middle School. A number of different items at both of our comprehensive high schools. Band equipment, replacing some older furniture from Miss Elder at Consol, as well as some furniture and science equipment in our science labs at Consol. At College Station High School, a new art kiln, also some band equipment, CTE equipment, and that has to do with some ventilation in our culinary lab and some additional storage in our training area, actually at our field house at CSHS. Also, this will be up for your consideration tonight on our regular agenda from Dr. Trammell, the Measure of Academic Progress. It's an online resource, and she'll go into that again at the regular meeting and be asking for your approval. I've already captured it in these numbers. And a new vehicle for purchasing. So all of these things are part of that $400 and something thousand worth of exceptional items we've approved that were requested for next year, but we're able to capture them this year since we're tracking to the good. I project our final recapture payment to actually be at $13,900,000. Right, do it now, settle it up today. So when we adopted our budget last year, again, we were projecting a loss of 1%, and we had projected a $14.6 million. We're tracking to the good, and due to those, our ADA to the good and some of our weights, we'll settle in at about $13.9 million. I still have $14.3 in our financials. I'll wait another month or so. It takes TEA a little bit longer to settle their numbers out, but this is where we should land for this past school year. If you recall, for 18-19, we adopted a $4.6 million deficit. As of right now, we're tracking more along the lines of a $1.9 million deficit. Even with that being said, I will mention to the board that and many of you are aware that we historically underspend our appropriated projections. So the 1.9 deficit is assuming that we spend 100% of all those appropriation numbers you see there. And typically I guess what I'm saying is I anticipate that we come in even better than that number.
Mr. Martinell, I know we always come in under that. I'm just curious, do you know what percentage? I mean, we don't do 100%, but is it 95? Is it?
Of 128 million, I would assume we're probably going to be within 99% of that number. So which is $1.2 million, $1.3 million. So we'll be within 1 or 2%. What really you have to watch through the course of the year, Mr. Nugent, because there's so much money in payroll that it's imperative that you manage that number appropriately when you project it. If you miss payroll, you don't make that up. So I think 1.9 is probably still conservative. I think we'll improve on that number through the course of the next couple of months, and we'll close out this year. I absolutely know that when we come with our budgeted numbers and, our audited numbers in December, it will be better than that. Okay. It's 18-19. So 19-20, when we looked at this in May, this is May past law. These are some of our numbers. A few of them may have changed a little bit simply because we finished the school year and I updated some of that data from the 6 weeks. But we're using 2.93% growth. And I'll point this out to you simply because when we look at House Bill 3 in just a moment, the M&O tax rate is going to be different. So under past law, our M&O tax rate is $1.04. We were using an additional $1.4 million to our payroll cost here in this number over adopted number this year for raises. That's about 1.5% across the board. Riverbend tracking at $850,000, and we had earmarked $500,000 and actually approved that much when we met in May for new positions for 19-20, projecting a recapture payment of $18.1 million. And a deficit of 5.9. So that's what we were looking at under the previous law when we met in May.
Now you can forget all of that.
Now we're going to do kind of a side-by-side. Here is past law, which you looked at in May, And here are our projections with House Bill 3. Okay, I'll go step by step through each one of these. First, M&O tax rates are compressed to 93%, but we pick up our 4 golden pennies. So our M&O tax rate for next year will be 97 cents as opposed to $1.04. Obviously, you're taxing at a lesser rate, so you're going to collect less local property revenue. The other number that I changed in this particular situation is I added to our SHARs. Don't think of this settle up. We're just tracking to the good with our regular payments. So I went this year. So I went ahead and upped that projection to 2.1 million instead of the 2. And you can see how the funding formula had made some adjustments. And I encourage you not to get too. This is not necessarily going to be about revenue. This is going to be about recapture and appropriations. Okay. What the funding formulas in the past law were providing us. Versus what they are in House Bill 3. So this has to do with basic allotment, a lot of the funding formulas, our entitlements. There's a number of different things that go into these calculations. So the old law looks good. However, if you recall, we were looking at a significant recapture payment. So really that was washing out to the bad for us. So some of the revenue as far as the state fund and SHARs. And so we're looking at, we're under past law, 129.4 million in revenue. With House Bill 3, we're looking at 118.5. And again, a large portion of that is the compression of the M&O tax rate of 7 cents. Okay. Now on the appropriations side, and we'll work our way all the way down the list here. In May, we had the $1.4 million for compensation for raises for our employees. I've increased that by approximately $2.4 million over the 1.4. So this $95.4 million is actually running at about a $3.8 million increase to current payroll this year for compensation alone, and we're going to speak to this in detail. So this is really a 2.36 over the 1.4 that we already had there. House Bill 3, as far as compensation, there are some requirements associated with that. House Bill 3 says that districts must spend 30% of their new funding on compensation for full-time district employees. And they go on to say that 75% of that 30% must be spent on classroom teachers, librarians, counselors, and nurses. And I italicized this as well, prioritizing differentiated compensation for classroom teachers with more than 5 years of experience. So on your teacher schedule, that's going to be 6 plus, okay? 25% of the 30 may be used as determined by the district to increase compensation for other employees who are not administrators. So, kind of apply the math to this. We're running to the good with House Bill 3 of approximately $5.2 million. So under House Bill 3, we would have to spend $1.56 million on compensation. And I'll go over this again in just a minute. If you recall, the number that I just said that we've earmarked for compensation and our proposed schedules for next year in employee raises is 3.8. Okay, but under House Bill 3, we'd have to use 1.5, 1.2 million of that for teachers, an additional 25% however we want to, whether all teachers or for everyone else.
And remember, when we say teachers, it's the 4 groups in there: teachers, counselors, nurses,
teachers,
and
counselors,
librarians.
nurses, and librarians that I listed up above. Okay, so those are the have-to numbers. Okay, this is our proposed compensation plan that's up for consideration at the regular board meeting tonight. We're actually earmarking 3.8 million, just shy of 3.8 million for additional or for compensation for our employees. And what this would look like as far as teacher raises, 0 to 5 year teachers, because remember we have to differentiate for more than 5 years experience. 0 to 5 years, an increase of 3.6, that's on the low end, up to 4.5% off teacher schedule midpoint. The midpoint's 50,000. So if I translate that percentage for you, that's 1,800 up to 2,250 for 0 through 5. Starting at step 6 and above, those increases look like range from 5.1% off the midpoint to 5.6. So that's actual number of 2,550 to 2,800. All this told is a cost of 2.5 million. Well, we're well above what's required by House 3 requirements. And to be perfectly candid with you, that number just wouldn't get it done as far as compensating our folks the way we need to. So 2.5 million toward teachers,
Teachers, counselors, nurses, and librarians.
toward the 4 groups.
I got it, okay.
The other folks, paraprofessional, which are our clerical and classroom assistant hourly folks, that's 4% off the midpoint of their identified pay grade. So there's a number of different pay grades in the paraprofessional pay schedule, and those are all identified in our compensation plan that's proposed at the regular board meeting. So 4% for those folks. Auxiliaries, which are our custodial, grounds, child nutrition, transportation, 4% off of their respective pay grade of their particular position. Administrative professional and administrators. Administrative professional, non-teaching professional, like diagnosticians, LSSPs. There are some coordinators in there as well. Basically, it's folks that are on a 1-year administrative contract. This administrators down here are 2-year contracts. Those are your campus assistant principals, campus principals, central office administrators, central office assistant directors, directors, chief officers, those folks. So there are actually 84 people here and 111 there. So 2% off midpoint for those folks. All told, these raises run a little bit over $1.2 million. So all in, right at 3.8 total compensation. Well above what would be required in House Bill 3. 1.5, folks, we had that basically in the budget before House Bill 3, just to be perfectly honest with you. So this is what you'll see proposed in the number that I'm using in our projections currently, and this is the compensation that's proposed at the regular board meeting tonight for your consideration. Keep going, exceptional items. I should just take that out. This really should just say new personnel. If you remember, we had earmarked $500,000 previously. We've added an additional $1 million to that, so that number is $1.58 million. And those, we'll take a look at those now as well. Here's the new personnel that we're looking at going into 1920. Obviously, the ones in white that say approved are things that we've already moved forward on. If you look at the first 2 rows, we've had significant growth in those programs through the course of last year, and we're projecting that to continue into next year. So almost 800,000 really in special ed. So new positions, the first column of 423,000. We had $350,000 worth of personnel and working special programs on federal money this year that we need to move to the general fund. 3 gen ed teachers. These gen ed, there's 1 at middle school and high school is where these 3 positions are distributed. 2 full pre-K teachers and assistants. A full bilingual position, I think that's actually split among 2 campuses, and increasing our bilingual stipends. Those are currently $3,500, proposing an increase of $15 to make those $5,000 to keep up with the market. We did some reclass on some positions here in purchasing and up to temporary budgets to help during the busy times. So there's $22,000 with some reclass in the purchasing and business department, and adding a parking lot attendant at College Station High School. That gives them 2, and that's comparable to what we have at Consolidated. So the number we've approved thus far is $1.25 million of new personnel. And this is kind of the I guess feedback or conversation that we'd like to have with the board is I have 1.5 already earmarked in the number we're looking at, and we'll look at the bottom line here in a moment. The positions or the numbers we're sitting on, there's a 300,000 that we're sitting on until we can kind of discuss tonight and get feedback from all of you, is 163,000 for our facilities. That could look like, and Mr. Hall would prioritize those, but for example, additional grounds crew or additional custodians, or if we need an additional plumber or electrician, but we'd allow him to use this money and assign those positions where they're highest need. Also, I've earmarked money for the possibility of approving a director of fine arts. We've heard that feedback several times, and also of coordinator of social studies in our CNI department. We have coordinators of 3 of the 4 core areas. This would be for the 4th. So there's $300,000 worth of discretion that we can come back to and discuss here in just a moment. In particular, how I have these positions divvied up. Questions so far? Okay, recapture. So I told you it's not necessarily about new revenue, it's about appropriations. We were projecting 18.1 under House Bill 3 because of your basic allotment, your entitlements per student are changing, those types of things. Our recapture payment has went down to the tune of 16.7 million to $1.4 million. So that's where we make up the ground, really. Materials and supplies. I did increase that 250,000. That is to increase Mr. Hall's budgets for custodians, grounds, operations, and there's also some funds in there to increase some of our campus supply budgets as well. So that's an additional 250,000. Our appropriations, we were looking at 135.4 million under old law, 122.3 under new law, and you know, I mean, basically it has to do with your delta on recapture, obviously, and a new projected deficit from 5.9 to 3.8. So what we've been able to do with House Bill 3 is drop our deficit by 2.1 million. We've increased the amount we had earmarked for compensation by almost 2.4 million for our employees. Riverbend held steady. We increased new personnel by $1 million and some supplies budgets by 250. So we've reduced our budget by 2.1 million and at the same time been able to increase some of our appropriations to the tune of about 3.6 million. So we're looking at this number, and I mentioned to you earlier about some of those personnel positions. So if you remember the 3.8, I'm going to go back a slide or two to the new personnel. So these positions are in that 3.8. Or we could hold on them, and I could draw that down just as much, and the deficit we'd be looking at currently is 3.5.
So I would like to just, the 2 different positions are a little, vary just a little bit. Facilities is one of those that you can hire a custodian or a grounds worker pretty much any time of the year, whenever those positions are approved and funding becomes available. When you're looking at trying to find a director of fine arts, a coordinator of social studies, those are time sensitive, and that you might be taking somebody from a campus more than likely, and then they'd have those people would leave and they would have to be replaced, and there's a very real timeline on that for people moving from one district to another. You can have your contract held by a district if you resign later than the 45th day before the first day of instruction. So think July 4th, somewhere around there. So you lose the ability after about the 1st to the 4th of July to potentially hire anybody from other districts. So it becomes a little bit more problematic for those types of positions. So really kind of what we're looking at is a conversation and a head nod from the board if it's we are prepared tomorrow to go ahead and post those 2 positions. But we wanted to show that if we needed to back up a little bit, there is a little bit of as Mike said, about $330,000 of play right now in what we've got before you.
You want us
We're
to
not
talk
done.
now, or you, oh, you're still going?
Oh, absolutely.
Or do you want to talk
I
about
was
it now,
with you, Mr.
Martineau?
Harris, but I can go ahead and wrap up, and then we can discuss that if you.
Whatever you want to do.
With that being said, okay, this is where we're tracking at this point in time. We still have final property values to come in and those types of things. So we'll be tweaking still through the next couple months up until August. The big piece of this, however, obviously, this is a regular board meeting and considering the proposed compensation for current employees, and that compensation generates our 1920 compensation plan and hiring schedule. So that's the big piece, and that's right at 3.8 as far as cost.
Could we go back to that one chart where you had it as a percentages for the different classes?
Oh, yes, sir, right here.
The one that I would like to talk about is on administrators, 2%. What was the logic on that one being 2%?
So the administrators are the highest paid class of employees that we have in a school district. They work longer years and are more highly compensated. So a 2% raise for an administrator on an actual dollar amount can be a lot larger than some of the 4% raise, certainly for an auxiliary personnel, or even a 3% raise for administrative professional. So as we looked at, we did not have an unending supply of dollars. We looked at what we needed to do, what has happened historically in College Station ISD, and we looked at the intent of the legislation. The intent of the legislation was to prioritize raises for the classroom and teachers, counselors, nurses, and librarians, as I've reminded everyone a couple times tonight. And it was to prioritize those for those with more experience. And so you've seen that we have done that. So I think what we are doing in recommending a 2% increase for administrators is we are prioritizing the limited resources that we have, and we are putting a greater proportion or a greater percentage increases in those in the classroom and again, paraprofessionals and auxiliary people.
How are we doing in comparison to other districts like us? If you start looking at our competition.
So one of the things that we do every year is that we work with the Texas Association of School Boards, and they help us do salary studies, and they look at where we are on the market compared to other school districts. This year is hard to know because everybody's salary scales are changing, so they could only really compare us to previous years. We have worked to address areas that we fall below the 90th percentile of our comparison districts each year, and we have addressed those in years past. We will, as we move into the 2020-2021 school year, next school year, after everybody across the state has made their changes to their administrative and paraprofessional and teacher pay grades, we'll have a new market group, and we'll be able to know where we stand with those. I would also mention to the board that this is not our last time to be able to provide raises. We want to be able to come back also in the second year of the biennium and provide some additional raises at that time as well. We want to make sure that we don't get too far over our skis, if you will, and make sure that we have the money available to be able to meet our needs right now and fairly compensate our employees and still be able to look at the future and be able to provide those ongoing sustainable raises.
Well, I want to hit that point before you go too far away. I know at the executive committee you were debating between 3% and 2%, and I appreciate you going with 2. I think it's a good show of faith and a true attempt to honor the intent of the legislature in doing that. The other thing I want to point out, and I know most of us were here when we had our salary review, and you probably followed it if you weren't on the board. But it's interesting that the legislature wanted to direct pay increases to the more experienced teachers, which is something that CSISD had traditionally done. In fact, we were told by our salary study, we might need to scale that back a little more and flatten out our schedule a little bit. So I did point out, or want to point that out, that it shows that we were, I guess, in line with the thinking of the legislature, at least at some level, already. Okay, sorry.
I have a question on the, could you go back to that slide? Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
On the midpoint, for the teacher raises, what is going to determine, is it performance based on low or high, or where you fall into that?
Go ahead, Mike.
These are actually relative to the step. So
Okay.
this has nothing to do, nothing at all, Ms. Green, with any type of performance or
Okay.
anything of that nature. This is just the variance among those 0 to 5 steps.
Okay.
So we're just capturing how that varies among the steps.
Okay.
And so for tonight's meeting, we have the salary schedule that's hot linked to that, so you can actually look at those, how that falls out.
Perfect.
So, yeah, so from like step 7 to 8, maybe a certain dollar amount or percentage, and 8 to 9, maybe just a little bit different.
Gotcha. So
It has
low
to do with
is,
this.
has to do with if I'm a first-year teacher versus a fourth-year teacher.
Correct.
Got it.
In fact, 3.6 is for the 0 and first-year teacher.
Okay.
And 4.5 is
Is
for the
that the
fourth.
5?
Or the fourth year. Okay.
Or 5,
5.
going into 5, yes.
Thank you.
So I want to just kind of take a look at our tax rate projection as well, because I think that's a part of this conversation. You look at our historicals, total tax rate on the top, M&O blue, and in the red our INS. So current year, or the year we're wrapping up right now, $1.37, 1.372, 33.2 for INS, $1.04 on the M&O. Next year, right now, what I'm projecting, obviously, the M&O is being compressed through House Bill 3 to 97 cents. Projecting that we will reduce or lower our INS tax rate by about 5 cents. So we're looking at around a 12-cent drop in our tax rate next year to pass along to our taxpayers with what we've got proposed. Again, I have kind of summarized it here. It's projected to drop 12 cents. That's an 8.7% decrease. Homeowner with appraised value of $300 would see a savings of about $330. So things have definitely lined up from that perspective for us also. So I'm going to revisit and feedback from the board on the
The next slide said comments and questions, so
Yes.
we're at that point now.
So I was going to go back here and get feedback on that information.
Thank you. It's a lot to take in.
And-
Questions, comments? You're looking for specifically related to those proposed positions?
Yes, sir.
Is that,
Feedback, yes.
okay, I'm willing to go, or somebody else wants to go?
I have a question. It just doesn't matter when.
Go ahead.
So I'm curious on the facilities piece. How did you get to that number? And is it specific positions, or you said that it was the discretion of Mr. Hall? Like, how was
So
that?
here's what we had in there. We had 4 custodians who would
Okay.
be subject to assignment every day. They would come in and be centralized, and because we've got somebody sick or out,
Sure.
all the time, so they would come in every day subject to assignment. It would be a new 3-person grounds team. So, in looking at the different requests that Mr. Hall made, those totaled up to 163.4, those 7 positions. When Mr. Martindale went back and visited with Mr. Hall, he said, that's great, but I may prioritize a plumber or an electrician over one or the other. Can I get back to you? And so that's why I said, okay, we're going to put a $160,000 basically placeholder in there,
Okay.
and you tell us, as somebody running your division, what's the most important thing that you would need.
Okay.
So the actual calculation was based off grounds and additional custodians, but I wanted Mr. Hall to have discretion on the best if he felt that was the most appropriate need at this
Okay.
point.
Okay. Thank you.
If we were to give you a head nod or actual approval, whatever you want, on the Director of Fine Arts and Coordinator of Social Studies. From a timing standpoint, do you feel like this would be an effective time to do that? I mean, do you have time to get the people you want? Or given those timeframes, would you feel rushed?
Well, as in any situation like that, if we wouldn't be able to put a position out there and we got candidates that we didn't think could perform the job and to the satisfaction that we would expect in College Station ISD, we might go unfilled in that position. So I can tell you that if we go any later than basically tonight and being able to start putting that up this week, then we would run into, it would significantly curtail our ability to hire people if we were to hire somebody from outside the district, or to replace somebody if we hired somebody from within the district. Does that make sense? Because we're running
Sure.
in that 45th day before the first day of instruction. But we would not go so quick that we would compromise the quality of the individual to lead either the social studies department or the fine arts department.
Okay. Well, of the two, I think I would be inclined tonight for sure to give you a head nod in favor of that, knowing some of the issues that we've had in the district in previous years, and we've heard of a need of those positions in particular for quite some time. So if we have an opportunity to do it at this point, it might be able to help us solve some issues. And I'm assuming you think that, or you wouldn't be proposing them.
We do, but this is so new. We wanted just y'all to see what we've done to cut that deficit. I wanted to kind of see what your feelings are on that and what we've been able to do with salaries and what we've been able to do with other additional positions. So they're all kind of part of the same pie here. That's why we wanted to have this feedback.
Yeah, and it sounds like the others, you could wait a bit, excuse me, until you have a better feel for the actual implementation of House Bill 3, kind of with your overall conservative approach to this. But if you think those are important to have tonight, let us know as well.
On the facilities, I'm still blown away. I remember when we saw that report of the number of acres they mow and the number of square feet with all these new facilities, and we haven't increased staff. I mean, support staff. I mean, I think that's long overdue.
That's why we added it in. We have an opportunity to go get some of those positions because we have prioritized the classroom and the resources that we've had over the past few years. And Mr. Hall did a good job of explaining where he is in his department in regards to coverage.
We have been very busy opening new buildings and getting the appropriate staff in there and take care of the kiddos. And in that process, it is difficult to keep up with those that support those facilities. So you're absolutely right, Mr. Schaefer.
Well, but Mr. Hall also did a great job explaining to us that meeting that it wasn't the last management oversight meeting, but the probably second to last. And I mean, my takeaway was how spread thin our facilities crew is. And I mean, and as far as the other one, like Mr. Harris said, these are the ones that just keep coming back up, and for whatever reason or another. And just looking at the director of fine arts, we were talking comparing ourselves to other districts, comparable districts to us. I mean, it seems like in our district, are we not the only one without a director of fine arts?
That has certainly been shared with us. I can't say with 100% certitude, but I would say
I'll throw it out there. That's my understanding.
Of 13,600 kids with 2 comprehensive high schools usually has one.
Okay.
And I believe that everybody in our UIL district does have a director of fine arts.
That is duly noted.
I have a question. Where does substitute teacher pay come into our budget? What piece is that?
It's in payroll.
It's in
payroll. Yes, ma'am. And we're looking at adjusting those, but I think I can manage that through the process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to pipe in.
Yes, ma'am.
I know y'all can't see me. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I know y'all can't see me nodding my head over here about the fine arts director, but I definitely support that. And then also from my volunteer work in the schools, I've been able to see that we could use some more help with facilities. So I completely trust John Hall and his discretion, what he feels the district needs. I think he has a pretty good handle on all of that. So I'm in support of both of those.
Thank you.
And again, those are captured in that bottom line already. So they are there already.
So this is where we are as of 5:45 on the 18th. As you are aware, we get new iterations of the funding template every week or so. And we're on our third iteration of it right now, and it changes from time to time. It changes drastically for us on Friday. So we feel that irrespective of what changes might come our way in the future, that we are prepared to and excited to take this type of step with $3.8 million of additional compensation for our current teachers, and adding over $1.5 million of additional staff that we need to keep up with our growth in special education students and other places as well. I would like to highlight that of the $5.2 million that we must spending $3.8 million on compensation is 73% of the dollars that we have as a result of the new funding system under House Bill 3 is going directly into people who already work for College Station ISD, and 2 out of every $3 are going to teachers, counselors, nurses, and librarians. I think that recognizes a tremendous investment on the part of the state and on the part of the Board of Trustees and our school district. And so we are proud to make this recommendation to you, and again, that will be at the regular meeting tonight when we ask about compensations and about compensation plan for the 2019-2020 school year.
All while lowering our tax rate.
Those are all good things. Great. Do you have what you need?
I think we do. Any other conversation, questions, comments?
No.
We haven't mentioned the social studies coordinator, but I mean, I'm definitely on board with that.
Okay.
The one area that we don't have one, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Agreed. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Mike will be back later.
That takes us to item C2. Consideration, discussion, and possible action related to an update on board policy FNF local regarding student drug testing. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. As you recall, moving into the 2018-19 school year, the school year that we just finished, we made a number of changes to policy and practice in College Station ISD regarding safety. One of the things that we did after months of conversation at the board level is we enacted, or updated our board policy FNF local to implement a random student drug testing program for high school students, those in grades 9 through 12, who are involved in extracurricular activities or choose to park on campus. We've now finished the first year of implementation, and we've asked Molly Perry, our Chief Administrative Officer, to come and give us an update as to kind of how we started this whole road down, random student drug testing with FNF local, what happened this year, and some of the statistics behind the first year of implementation. With that, Mrs. Perry.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ely. Good evening. I think I'm good. So as Dr. Ely said, we've had about a year now since the board approved this policy change, and so there's been quite a lot that has happened through the process of implementation just procedurally. This was certainly more than just development of guidelines. There were a lot of logistics, and so this evening I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the timeline and provide some reminders of specifically what our policy says, and then we'll talk a little bit about the actual practice and the results and some recommendations as well. So as you probably recall, we began those discussions over a year ago, back in March of 18. And over the course of several months, there was a lot of discussion about the potential benefits, pitfalls, concerns, and ultimately adopted that policy 1 year ago in our June 2018 meeting. We didn't actually implement the policy immediately, though. We knew that there would be quite a bit of work to do to make sure that we were ready to seamlessly roll this out. And so the policy actually did go into effect in October. And so we really began working on all of the details and gaining consent. And ultimately, our first testing occurred in November of 2018. And since that time, we did provide testing once per month through the remainder of the school year. So as you, I'm sure, recall, we had several reasons for adopting this policy, and it's very much a preventative approach. We want to, of course, ensure that our students are healthy and safe, and we want to really prevent the use. If our students have an easy way to say no thank you, and this policy can help with that, then that is very much our intent at the heart of it, because we do know there's a lot of peer pressure out there. And then ultimately, it's a good source of information to parents. We can allow parents to opt in even if their students aren't required to participate as part of their extracurricular or parking aspect of campus life. So in our policy, we do require students in grades 9 through 12 who are either in extracurriculars or would like to park on campus, oftentimes those are the same students, to participate in this mandatory drug testing policy. And so students that participate will be randomly tested throughout the school year. We're looking at both illegal drugs and alcohol, and we do require an orientation to the program so that our families and our students are aware of why we're doing this and really fully versed in the program before they provide their written consent. That is done through an online video that's accessible to the public on our website. We do require parent written consent as well, and part of that is saying I affirm that I have watched the video and I'm aware of the requirements of the program. And finally, in terms of policy, we do assess at least 40, but no more than 90 students each time. Ultimately, what that looks like in practice is that we have a base number of 30 per comprehensive high school, and then at least one at College View, based on the enrollment and the number of students currently. So procedurally, we contract with a lab for much of these services, not just the actual testing, but for the identification of which students. We do not conduct the random sampling. We provide the list of our students to the company, and each month prior to the testing, they actually have a computer program that generates the list. I receive a copy of that along with one contact person, which is an assistant principal at each of our high schools. And they have a few days in advance so that they can prepare and know where those students might be with their schedules, depending on what time the folks from the lab may arrive. We set those days in advance really to avoid any major conflicts. We certainly wouldn't want that to be on a state testing day or an SAT day. Want to minimize disruption to the campus setting. And so the lab actually sends a male and a female technician out, and we really vary which campus they go to first, which day of the week they come, what time of the month, early, middle, late, to try to keep it as unexpected as possible. So upon their arrival, our technicians use a multi-stall restroom, one male, one female. They go in and lock those off to prepare the spaces so that other students aren't coming in and out. They have procedures to detect any potential issues with tampering, like blowing the toilets, and they actually are in that common space of the restroom with a table so that they can collect the samples right there. Students aren't having to leave the facility with their sample cup or anything of that nature. So we have procedures in place, just like we would for any other reason for kids to come into the office. call on the telephone to the classroom, send so-and-so down, or send a student, send an assistant principal to collect the student and have them report to the office. So about 3 to 4 students enter per round, so to speak, collect the samples, and we verify that the information is correct on the sample cup, on the form, so that if there is a need to contact a parent or guardian, we have accurate information there. The administrator who is involved in the program is there during that time and available to help make sure students are coming and going as needed, and that the forms are accurately completed. Are there any questions about the procedures before I move forward? I know that's quite a bit of information.
Oh, I think you and I got an email addressing, and some of it does sound very similar to that, but I wondered if you had any feedback on maybe the process that's followed, and are there any concerns about privacy or student security in any of that?
Go ahead.
I spoke with both campus administrators in preparation for the presentation, and we do speak on a regular basis in the implementation of the program and making sure that the lists are updated, that we're setting dates. And I had not received any prior concerns regarding feedback. And when I spoke with the folks at each of our campuses prior to the presentation, they said that things were really going very smoothly at this point in the process. When we first started, of course, we were all learning together in terms of, the best way to do this seamlessly and quickly. And really, we've gotten it down to 30 to 45 minutes at each comprehensive high school from start to finish, and they said it's going quite well.
And then I guess as a follow-up, what if a student has, say, a big test in, let's pick it, a hard class, physics, and they're sitting down to take their test and the knock comes at the door, hey, you need to go. How do we address something like that?
Sure. If the student was gone for a period that interfered with their ability to complete the test upon their return, we would work individually with them for extended time. We would never want this to interfere with their ability to complete a test or affect a grade. This would very much be like any other excused absence from the class. But typically, students are not gone for an extended period of time.
So, excuse me, there's 30, from the comprehensive high schools, there's 30 kids at each month that are being tested, 15 male, 15 female. We don't call all 30 students down at the same time. There's a big long line outside the restroom. So we have different waves of kids that come through, 3 or 4 at a time. So hopefully if there were this situation you're talking about with a physics test, and it was one of the earlier waves, we could have somebody else come in and maybe come and get them at their second period class or fifth period class. Or whatever, and be able to work through that. Be my hope we would be able to do that.
Okay, and I guess that's part of the assistant principal who's coordinating all that. That's
Absolutely.
some
It would
of
be
the
his
stuff they
or
look at.
her responsibility is to coordinate all that, while the lab tech is actually in the restroom coordinating the retrieval of the samples.
Okay.
I think you answered my question. So 3 to 4 students at a time come down. So they do know, I guess, once they're there, right? There's the element of privacy, I guess, is amongst those students is.
So as far as privacy goes, they're toileting privately.
Right.
As far as why they're there, they probably know. Once the first group goes through and the advent of social media, who knows what is going on at that point as well. But yes, just bearing in mind again, these are people do volunteer to do this, so they've chosen to do this. To be a part of the extracurricular activities or park. So, yes, ma'am.
And so on the parental consent piece, so if they're going to take part in the extracurricular or park, then they have to submit to the program, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And we also have an opt-in feature for those who we may have kids at our high schools who are not involved in extracurricular activities or don't park, but their parents would like to take advantage of this opportunity. They don't necessarily get tested. They go into the pool and they could be randomly selected just like anybody else. So
Have we had people do that, parents?
We have not at this point, but it is on the
an option.
information online and available.
It's part of our board policy.
Okay.
All right. So in terms of results, I know when we were having conversations at the board level, there was a lot of question about the process when students are taking a prescribed medication. And in that case, students are not reported as positive until we have confirmed. And so the way logistically that works is that the assistant principal gets a notice, they contact the parent and say, you need to contact the MRO, here's the information, they give them a call. Initially, there was a little bumpy just because it was all new, but we have not had any instances at all where parents have said that we have a medication and it has not been cleared as a negative. So that's become a very, very smooth part of this process as well. And it is actually quite common because there are a number of medications that students do take that would flag in a drug test. Again, we are only using this related to eligibility for parking and extracurriculars. It is really not designed to be an excessively punitive program. We're not imposing any sort of disciplinary sanctions like in-school or out-of-school suspension or placement at the DAP because these are not students that are under the influence or in possession. These are just really looking at a drug test. And then finally, I think it's important to know that those results are very confidential. It's no way part of their academic record, and it's kept separately. So just as a reminder, we do have the parent notification component. If a student is confirmed positive, that notification does include information related to a variety of community resources that they may choose to access. And so we think that that's important. We also do have the consequence component regarding the participation or the parking with first offense of 15 calendar days, second of 30, and then third of the full calendar year as specified in policy. So, yes.
One quick question. So if we did drug testing the second to the last day of school,
Then that would provide information for the family. It would also continue to have that purpose of hopefully, resisting peer pressure, but there would not be sanctions unless it was the third positive for that student.
Or unless they were involved in an activity that does go into the summer. Bear in mind, we do have some of our FFA and other people do travel and do represent the school during parts of June. So if they were involved in one of those programs and they were out for 15 calendar days and it impacted something like that for those specific programs, then it could have an impact.
I guess my question was
It does not roll over to the next calendar year.
That's right. Unless it's the third offense, yes.
No, sorry, did I say calendar?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, next school year. Thank you.
If you test positive, or if a student tests positive, are they retested a certain amount of time later?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we have an automatic retest if a student tests positive in 1 month. They will be in addition to the 30 that are already being randomly selected that next time. And
And is that, I have a question about that. Is that every month? From then on out for the rest of the school year, they're tested every month? Or
No.
is it just the next time?
it's for the next 3 times.
The next 3 times? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So this year we had across all of our 3 high schools, 2,772 students who were participating in the program. And beginning in November with our first testing all the way through May, a total of 426 tests were conducted. Of those, we had 12 total students who had at least one confirmed positive result. And of those 12, 4 students were confirmed positive twice. And then of those 4, there were actually 2 students who were confirmed positive 3 times. So the 12 is the total number of students, and then the 4 is part of the 12, and the 2 is part of the 4. Trying to clarify.
and that takes out the ones that were on a prescription by a doctor, right?
Absolutely.
Correct.
Those are all reported as negative once we confirm.
How many were tested positive and then changed that because of prescription drugs? I mean, how many people had to go through that trouble?
MRO.
Through the MRO process, I would have to pull that data for you because ultimately those are all reported as negatives. And so I don't have just a report of the ones
Do
who were
you, was it a
initially.
lot of them or just a handful or you
If-
don't,
I
you
don't
don't
know.
recall?
Yeah, I'd have to pull the
Would just be curious
information.
of how many people had to go through that process.
There were several each testing. Yeah, there definitely were at least a few.
And a testing for us was about 61, 62
Mm-hmm.
kids or so every time.
That's
30
right.
each of the comprehensive high schools, 1 or 2 at College View.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Gives you a feel.
And finally, I do have several recommendations, some of which we have already implemented. The first is that we gain consent electronically as part of our registration process. Beginning the policy mid-semester was quite laborious for our staff at the high school campuses because we were watching videos and getting written consent, which, as you can imagine, for high school students can be a bit of a challenge, but our staff there were very helpful, but they are also very excited to know that this will be automated. And having already gone through this as a parent, it was very smooth. You only get that flag up in InfoSnap when you have a student enrolling in 9 through 12 explaining the process, linking you over to the video as well as the FAQ documents, and then you actually electronically sign right there in the registration form. Secondly, because we will be implementing at the very beginning of school, I am recommending that we begin testing in the month of August. And in fact, I'm already working with our folks at each of the campus to coordinate dates for those first several months of testing. And that way we're able to finish in late April or early May and still have the number of total testing times as specified by board policy. And then finally, just the collaboration has been an important part of this process between myself, campus administrators, and our contracted lab to make sure that we're really picking the best possible days that work for everyone. Because they are coming in from out of town, and so we want to coordinate with them and make sure that we're continuing to be unpredictable because the program is random not only for the selection process but when and timing. With that, I would love to answer any other questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for that. I guess I have a question to start. It's, have you received any feedback about positive impact on the culture, I guess from the campus administrators who are living with this? I mean, do they think it's doing any good? Is I guess how I'll ask it, to, not put too fine a point on it.
Yeah, in preparation again for the presentation, I just wanted to check in with them, and they felt like overall it's been very positive. Obviously, it's an additional component of their daily responsibilities, or at least monthly, and but they do feel that ultimately this is a positive thing for students to have an easy way to resist peer pressure and something that's monitoring that a little more closely. Having access to know who's being tested, I'll say I definitely saw a lot of names that I knew, and I think that kids are realizing, just because it's random doesn't mean that I won't be picked, because when we are testing monthly, they're undoubtedly going to know friends that are being tested.
When we began this discussion in spring of 2018, you'll recall that I mentioned that I'd had members of the community come to me and visit with me about really wanting to see the school district explore this type of program. And I had specifically had our 2 athletic coordinators come and make an appointment and sit down with me and talk with me one-on-one about how they felt it would be important because they had been in districts where this had been a policy and it had shown great signs of success in those previous districts. I visited with both of those individuals, Coach Huff and Coach Fedora, prior to this meeting, and I asked them point blank, is this having the effect that you had hoped that it would have when you sat down with me a little over a year ago? And both gentlemen said yes. What they're seeing is that it's changing the level of conversation. When it got up and going in the late fall, it was a disruptive force. People knew about it. They hear people talking about it in the locker room, in the hallways, if a measure of this program's success is people saying no and having a reason to say no because they're involved in an activity where they might get tested. If that's success, then this is being successful because that's what they're hearing. That's what their coaches and teachers are telling them they're hearing in the hallways from the student athletes, from those others involved in other extracurricular activities. So they enthusiastically said, yes, this is having an impact upon what we're doing in the school district and giving kids a reason to say no.
Thank you for that, Dr. Ely. That was actually my specific question, was if you had had a chance to talk with the coaches.
Yes,
since
ma'am.
They were some of the ones that brought it to you. So I'm glad to hear that they feel like it's made a positive impact.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Other questions or comments for us?
Oh, do you need anything from us?
No, sir. We just wanted to have an opportunity to come visit with you after the school year done and talk about the process and share a little bit about what happened and see if you had any feedback for us.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. That takes us to item C3. Consideration, discussion, possible action related to FC Local. Dr. Ely, do you have information for us, or do you want me to kick it off?
I'm happy to do whatever you would like, Mr. Harris. What I have brought to the meeting is Mr. Schaefer at last month's meeting when we were talking about FC Local asked for us to have a list of high school planning dates. And what we mean by that is students who are moving from 8th grade into 9th grade and they're having to register for classes and try out for cheerleaders and band and those types of things. Do we have a list of dates? I have that here. I'm happy to share those around to everybody in the group at this time if you'd like, or hold on to them until later. You tell me how
I'd
you'd like to
say
proceed.
get them out. Let's
Okay.
see. And with that, I'll jump in and say I thought a lot about the discussions we had and kind of where we have been as a community and where we are. And it felt to me like a lot of times we were kind of talking around each other. So I'm going to hand out, I took a stab at some language and pass those around. And, you know, it hits a couple of things. And I think while we're doing, that's being circulated, I want to kind of remind people the genesis of this policy and why it was actually put down on paper. And it really had to do with a perception by the board that after a 2016 rezoning, we had a process that no longer worked for our district because it did not solve the issues that we needed to address. So what we set about to do was put a process down on paper that might give us a better chance of having a successful outcome. And as part of that, the idea was to get information out and make it available to the board and the community, and by doing that, help the administration focus on it as soon as it becomes available. And so with that, I've taken a stab at some of this. And you know, one thing, Ms. Green said that, you know, for kids and for our community and certain members that I think it was, whichever school you start with, you should be able to finish at. Look at some language on page 5. When we're talking about grandfathering, you know, I think as we've been through it twice, and as I've dealt with it a couple of times in very direct fashion, I think it is important that kids be given an opportunity to spend all 4 years at one high school. So I put that in there as number 2, and there it is. The other change on that page is, quite frankly, just to correct something that we made grandfathering students eligible for bus transportation. So I put unless deemed appropriate by the district, because that's what we actually did. And then the other change to the policy addresses the timing. And if you'll look on page 2, the first one I hit last time pretty good. If we have it in November and it's practical to get it, sooner is better. You can get the information. You can always wait to act or do anything with it. But if it's there, get it. And you'll see, to me, a very important thing that is there. You'll see it. I'll read it, Ms. Nolan, for your benefit. Additionally, the administration shall identify key dates, events, time constraints, and other factors that would likely have a material impact on the timing and/or substance of decisions related to such recommendation. For example, dates of athletic team tryouts, student registration and course request, campus tours, etc., should be presented with any recommendation to adjust high school attendance boundaries. I would like to have had this when we started that discussion in December of 2017. And I don't think there's anyone here that would say they disagree with that. If you do, feel free. But I think it's important, and I put that as the example in there because everyone's familiar with it. But it, quite frankly, is about a whole lot more than that, because the odds of that same issue being a problem again, particularly with people in this room, it's pretty small, I think. That's not going to slip under the radar at any point for anyone who went through that. But there's a whole lot more that could. And the effort there is to have someone play the dedicated role of identifying those dates. Let's say it's not a boundary adjustment, but some kind of one of the alternate student enrollment options or programming changes or differential staffing, all the various things we've talked about. Well, as we saw tonight, those things can have a budget component. Okay, well, if they do, when do we need to have a decision made so that Mr. Martindale can factor that in? I think it's important that we have that as soon as we can possibly get it, because once the time goes by, you can't get it back. And then you're left with a potential problem, and you start having to make difficult decisions, and sometimes ones that you wish you didn't have to. So that's kind of the proposed language that I have, and I hope it strikes a balance between, quite frankly, the grandfathering piece, which I think that is a fair thing. We've all been through too, and we I think understand the importance of giving kids an opportunity to spend their entire career at one school. And then to me, quite frankly, the most important thing about the policy itself for making it useful is trying to get as much information as we can get as soon as it's reliably available. And that's why the November, December date, if we're using the snapshot, which we've deemed to be a reliable date certain, is important. Okay, with that, thoughts, questions, discussion?
I have a question for clarification.
Yeah.
I see bold and underlined. I take that to mean those are changes to language. Did you strike any language from existing policy?
No. All I did was add the bold and underline. Good question.
I think those are huge. I've struggled with the changing of students at different high schools, and so I think I applaud that. And then also the dates. I think so every student has the opportunity to participate in any type of activity they want. I think those are very well written.
So Jeff, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that you want it in the policies, you want it in writing, basically what Mr. Schaefer asked for, that timeline. You want that to always be, for the district and for the board to always be aware of that timing. Did I hear you say that to have someone within the district to almost be in charge of that, to make sure that that timeline is being considered?
Short answer, yes. I debated whether or not to put that as an example. Quite frankly, it adds a little teeth to it, and it definitely causes people to focus on it. I think the important thing, though, is to take from it that we need to know what dates are important and what impact the decision, whatever the recommendation may be. I mean, it may be portable buildings. And again, if there's a budget component, or do we need some variance from the city to have those, whatever it is, let's try to think it through on the front end so we know what our process needs to look like to get us where we want to be. That's the whole point of it. And I put the one more thing. I use the term the administration, and I did that just for consistency of the policy. My initial draft in my head said superintendent or his designee, to really focus in the superintendent on that. But I thought, well, the administration is good enough. They all get it when they read that, what it means and what it's after. Did I answer your question?
I think so. And I'm, again, nodding my head. I know you all can't see, but
Which way are you nodding it?
agree. I completely agree with all of that. Because the point of our discussion right now is to take this policy and make it better, to improve on it. And I think both of those additions, going ahead and putting in policy that once a student has started at a high school, it would be nice to be able to let them stay at that high school, unless, of course, there are crazy circumstances, right? I like that being on there, but also just making sure that it's in there to be aware of other situations that impact those decisions, just like you said, with timing, budget, all of those types of things. I think having that written down for someone to look at in the future is really helpful.
Yeah, I do too. That to me was the key. It's because, again, I don't anticipate that likely being the issue, but I'm confident there will be something else that is important. There always is. So let's have people who are expert in it think through that on the front end. And that way we know as we're going into a process kind of what our time constraints would be. Or if there are budgetary constraints, well, we need to know those too. Process constraints, all kinds of different things that could come up. Let's try to hit those on the front end. And it's, that part of it, that's still when it's in the hands of the administration, because focusing on that may change what their recommendation is. I'm not saying it would, but that's part of their process on their end before they come to the board with the report. Because the whole idea of the report, again, is to get the board reliable information as soon as it's available. And I think that language helps the reliability factor, if you will, on the information.
Okay, so hang on. Since I'm not seeing what you handed out.
Okay. You want me to read something to you?
Are you? No. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding it all. So the process constraints portion of this, you are wanting to be with that report that's given in November now. You're wanting that to be in November, and you're wanting process constraints to also be included with that report.
Yes, ma'am. That's the last sentence of the section entitled Annual Enrollment Review and Report. So it is linked with that report.
Okay. I like it.
And just so you know, it says November or December as soon as practical.
Okay, that makes sense.
We're leveraging technology. Somebody text you a picture.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
I think that this new language is extremely important, and I'm glad to see that is in here with the grandfathering, starting at a new high school, finishing at the high school. And so I appreciate you taking the stab at bringing this new language to us today. I'm curious, For high school boundary adjustments related to the opening of a new high school, I'm sorry, not related to opening of a new high school. So can we talk about what's
Yeah, read number 1 above. That's how we do new high schools, or have done them.
right?
Okay.
Right. So I'm curious as why we wouldn't extend that. I understand that, right? We have to start with someone, right? So we usually exclude juniors and seniors. We bring over freshmen and sophomore. I remember vividly when we opened CSHS and really beginning that talk track with them when they were in 7th grade and beginning that continuity and the excitement of going to the new school and really building that identity. I believe you had leadership committees for the students. But I'm curious as to why we wouldn't blanket that, right? So those that may want to stay and have an affinity for that high school that would have been, let's say, starting sophomores at the new high school could have the opportunity to stay and finish out. Why we would cut it off at a new, you know what I'm saying? Just on a new high school piece.
I do. And while he's getting his microphone, oh, you have one?
We're working
Okay.
technology issues.
Well, I can take a stab at it and say, it's twofold. One, the actual structure of it, all that is a statement of what's historically been done.
Right.
But 2, that leaves you opening a high school, in essence, with only freshmen, which is not a very tenable or efficient thing.
Right, but they just have the choice. It's not to say that they wouldn't choose. A lot would choose if they were designated to go as sophomores, but they would have the choice.
We did that last time in 2012 with the opening of College Station High School. If you were, correct? We didn't? They couldn't choose a grandfather? Okay, I guess we didn't, sorry. Never mind, forget what I said. I wish my microphone was
I
on.
can just tell you anecdotally, we didn't hear any issues related to that.
Right.
So I think from an efficiency standpoint, I can tell you as a taxpayer, it would be hard for me to support a cavernous building with just a freshman class.
Anecdotally, people are going to be excited, right, to go, but there could be extenuating circumstances where they would want to stay at that high school and not be moved to the new. Maybe not, but
Maybe. Well, there are processes for that.
I think as the policy is written, it allows future administrations and future boards to consider that going into a boundary adjustment for an additional, let's say, 3rd high school, to be able to consider that at that time. But it's interesting, we had people come to visit us on Friday and visit with Mr. Martindale and I, who are one high school town in West Texas and are considering going to a 2nd high school and talking through, do you open freshman only or freshman, sophomore, freshman, sophomore, junior? That who's to say that when the time comes, whoever's sitting around these tables at that time, we may open 9 through 11. At that time,
Right.
or we just won't know. The circumstances of first year, second year of a biennium or a UIL redistricting, and there's all sorts of other things that will come into play at that time. So
Right.
what we attempted to do when we originally wrote this, and number 1 was a part of that, is to try to give a historical account of kind of how we've handled this in the past. As you look at 1 and now 3 and 4, those are kind of the ways that we have
Right.
have acted within in the past.
I think the timing is spot on too, in addition with the planning dates. I think that's going to be a critical part of the decision-making and gives, our families, students, teachers, administration enough time to prepare for whatever changes are coming up. So I think that I like to see that language in here. But definitely the continuity and the consistency of the grandfathering language. Now, I know it's a general rule. It's not as what's done historically in the past. But I'm glad to see this language. I think it's very, very important as we look at, the social and emotional success of our students at this age. I mean, it's very critical that, the minimal disruption as possible in this age group. So I'm glad to see the board addressing this and discussing it.
Just a question. So if we get, the administration gets the information by, say, December meeting, third Tuesday in December, and does that mean that in order to get this schedule, to meet this schedule, you've got to have your rezoning done by right when you get back from Christmas break? Am I reading that wrong?
I think you're reading that wrong. I would say what it does is it makes you aware of what may be happening outside of this boardroom.
But you're sending an email to 8th and 9th grade students and telling them which high school they'll go to.
No, no, sir. So what this is right here, these are just things that happen every year. And we've got some dates on here that are specific to the 1920 school year. So we know that on the January 7th, this is when employee transfer requests open. So this is generally when everything happens. I think what this does is, in a situation like that, you come to a December meeting. We're contemplating adjusting high school boundaries, and we look at all of these things that are going on. Perhaps it gives us, board administration at that time, pause to say, well, maybe we don't do that in the spring. Maybe we do that late spring or summer or fall or another time, to where some of these things don't come into play. Or
You adjust dates.
or those people at that time say, no, it's okay, we can do it, but we're at least aware of what those dates are. It's not locking us into
I just
anything.
wanted to make sure future boards had more than 3 weeks to.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Start
And,
and
and
finish
that's
the
the thing.
rezoning.
It does not mandate the process they follow. The whole point is to get them the information that is available. When they're deciding on what process to follow, they'll have it. I mean, no, and quite frankly, I mean, there were 3 things that, when I went through that last rezoning, the rezoning before last, you pointed out one we had that was actually, I thought, so smooth it sometimes slips my mind, but that elementary school. There are 3 things that I came away with, and that was pretty consistent. One was that there was broad consensus that people liked the idea of utilizing the space we already have before asking for money to build additional space. Comparability of schools, people supported, and that the timing was not good. All of those things, I would say, there was pretty broad consensus. 2 and 3, I think some people might swap the order or argue about that a little bit, but that was my general takeaway of that. And of those, I think the timing one is one that I really focused on our process and what we could do to help future boards get ready as they make a decision. I mean, the whole hope of this is that they don't feel jammed up like we did, and that they get to the information sooner, and they can and have more runway as they look out. I mean, again, ideally, if they're doing the process, they're doing it and they're looking ahead 18 months instead of 8. I mean, that the way we would traditionally like to rezone or adjust boundaries. So I think that's a longer winded answer than no.
I follow you.
Okay.
So I also think we need to remember that the addition of this policy, FC Local, is allowing us to get that annual report that we were not getting, or that you guys were not getting in the past. And what I mean by that is that it's the report that has gone to the demographers, and the demographers have worked on it and given us, projections for the next 3 to 5 years, right? So having that every single year, unless something crazy happens, we should have at least an idea of what's coming the following year, right? So I think just don't forget that we are still we're a little more aware of what our futures look like now because of FC Local and because of that annual report.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make, and I'll kind of piggyback on that a little bit and say, it's about a whole lot more than boundary adjustment. I mean, the whole hope is that next to, as Dr. Ely pointed out at our last meeting, building a new school, those two are kind of your in-game options. There is a whole lot that could and should probably be going on prior to hitting those two things. And to me, that's the kind of information the board needs. They need to know, are we using portable buildings at an elementary school to accommodate added population? Well, if we are, we ought to know that, right? And future boards should know that, so they know that, okay, that thing is busting at the seams. There could be a crunch need for a boundary adjustment there, so that they can do something before it gets to that point. At least that's the hope. And I think the only way to give you that hope is get that good, reliable information as soon as it's available. What do we have?
We've got two more pretty quick-ish items to
Could we-
go to. So go ahead.
Could we could take action on this?
We could, from the administration's point of view, as looking it over and running the traps on that, in my mind, I think it would be acceptable to the administration, this new policy language and the additions that you shared with us.
Okay, no issues you see?
I do not.
I guess that's a good question. I didn't want to create problem for you.
I make the motion that we approve the revisions as outlined.
I will second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you
you.
for your work on this.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think you saved us about an hour, at least.
Well, I don't mind spending the hour, but I hope it's in a better place for future boards to deal with tough things. Okay, C4, consideration, discussion, possible action regarding FFAC local for EpiPens.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. This is actually an action item we have on consent agenda for this evening regarding changing our board policy FFAC local for EpiPens. And do you have policy language that you're going to show them?
I didn't.
Oh, yeah, it's linked to the agenda. So you
They
should have seen the,
copies on-
you've seen the policy language linked to the agenda for tonight. We just wanted to give you one more chance to talk about that. One of the questions that came up last time was how much are we having to pay for these and are they available to us? And we have shared that information that we are part of a grant program that does provide our campuses opportunities to have free EpiPens. So that is not a material cost to the budget for College Station ISD.
So as you can see, you do have a copy of the proposed revisions to FFAC in front of you. They are fairly minimal. This is, again, one of those policies that in practice will require a little more in terms of getting the pens out there and providing training to our folks. But we do have on the regular agenda for tonight consideration and approval of these policy adjustments.
So this is just an opportunity if you had any more questions before we put it on consent.
Oh, seems like a no-brainer to me. Okay.
Thank you.
Item C5, thank you. Consideration, discussion, possible action regarding DEC local for hardship leave. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. This is another conversation we began last month. We do not have this as an action item for tonight. We do anticipate bringing this to you in July. And this has to do with making some changes to our board policy DEC local for compensation and benefits, leaves and absences, and adding a different type of leave for hardship leave. With more information on that is Mrs. Berry.
All right. So as you've probably had an opportunity to look at some of the proposed adjustments, but I do want to take just a moment to walk you through. As a quick reminder, on page 1, the definition of immediate family for the purposes of DEC local is defined there. The first adjustment or recommended change is on page 3 of 7, and we have some clarification there at the beginning that any sort of accumulated paid leave would be used concurrently. So if I have days saved up in my bank and I am also using hardship leave, then those would also be used so that I would continue to be compensated during that time. Then on also page 3 of 7, we have that fifth reason for medical certification being required, and that's if that employee requests the unpaid hardship leave for either their or their immediate family's need. The next change is on page.
One quick question there on the first change on page 3. So I think what you said and what's worded is slightly different. So I'm just making sure if a person requests hardship leave, we will require them to use built-up leave,
That's
correct?
right.
So they can't just take hardship leave, hold their vacation and sick time, and then take that at a later date. correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you for the
We're good.
clarification. It would run
Okay.
concurrently.
Thank you.
Yes. On page 4 of 7, we are proposing some adjustments just to provide better clarification because the current language indicated 0 to 192. We don't have any employees on a 0-day contract. And so we're
It's a great
recommending.
gig if you can get it, but we don't
Just
have one.
a few adjustments
Pay much.
there to match with the actual number of days. And those are prorated. So if an individual begins well into the contract year, they would not receive the full number of days we would prorate. On page 6 of 7 is really where we see the substantive recommendations in terms of defining hardship leave as available for those employees who are not entitled to leave under the Family Medical Leave Act. And we've got some very specific criteria that employees would have to meet in terms of their own illness, injury, or disability, including pregnancy, or their immediate family, as we defined on the first page, or the birth or placement of a foster child or adoption. And so we would have, again, that documentation submission process through the Human Resources Department. And if that was requested for their own person, they would have to then provide the fitness to return, just as they would for other types of leave. And again, congruent to our other types of leave, if an individual is on our health insurance plan, they can continue that coverage at their own expense when they run out of unpaid leave. And that actually does happen fairly regularly, that an individual might need more time, but they're no longer being compensated, and then they pay their own premium. So you'll see at the beginning of page 6 of 7, there's not a specific day. We are recommending that that be 30 days. That would equate generally to 6 work weeks, which is not obviously as generous as the Family Medical Leave Act, but substantially more than we have in place and available currently. With that,
That's last change.
As Dr. Ely said, we're not recommending action on this tonight. We provided pretty substantial overview last month. Wanted to have an opportunity to look at recommended policy change and have any sort of conversation pending a possible discussion in July.
Mrs. Perry, Mrs. Green asked a question last month regarding bereavement leave. Can you address that?
Absolutely. We do have in our available options when an employee goes in to select their reason for personal leave as death and family. When it comes to a more extended leave, those are circumstances that the individual would work with our Human Resources Department on. We've never had a situation where an employee had a death in their immediate family and we weren't able to accommodate their needs.
So it wouldn't be considered a hardship that would hold their job per se. But what you're saying is it when they apply for the bereavement, there's a certain amount of days that they can take, or?
It would really depend on the impact of that employee. For example, if someone were to lose their spouse and that affects them personally to the point where they have their own medical needs, then that would fall under either FMLA or potentially hardship leave. But generally speaking, people are able to use their saved days and take the amount of time that they need necessary and appropriate for their circumstance.
Okay. And I think we mentioned last time about the catastrophic.
Catastrophically, I was,
So there's an opportunity for
Yes,
that.
yes, that's
come into
actually
play.
addressed in a different component of policy. But we do have an application process to Human Resources. If you've exhausted all of your paid leave days and you're eligible for FMLA or temporary disability, then you can apply for catastrophic leave and continue to receive compensation if approved.
Okay, thank you.
love to answer any other questions you may have.
No, I like the step. It looks like a good way to provide some stability to some people who are going through some hard times, so.
Okay.
Anything else? With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.